fired up to jump on the Rude Guest Hotline and welcome in Keith Smith from Spot Track and host of the Front Office Show. Talk a little NBA. What's up, Keith? How are you, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
What's happening?
Let's start with the big trade that went down yesterday between Minnesota and Charlotte. What do you make of that move for the Hornets to ship Ball out when he's by far their best player?
I don't know that he go by far their best player.
Okay.
I think he's certainly their most popular player, but I think Brandon Miller and Con Knipple are pushing him for best player. It's funny, there's a very wide divide on LaMelo Ball. He's very popular with fans, especially younger fans, but some of those in the NBA still think he's a little bit too much of a circus sideshow for them, where some of the things he does out there aren't always conducive to winning. That said, that got tamped down quite a bit last year. Charlotte team that's on the rise, and this is surprising from that standpoint because he's such a big part of what they were a year ago with being one of the better offensive teams we saw in the league and all their improvement. So for them to move on from him, they have to feel like, hey, for what he was making salary-wise, for where we're going with having to pay some other guys and what we want to be as a team, it just doesn't really fit. And they got one heck of a package.
They did.
Nas Reed is a really good player. They got a bunch of draft capital, so they're in a bunch of salary flexibility. They're in pretty good shape. And then for the Wolves, they're doing everything they can to prove to Anthony Edwards, we'll make big moves to try to win around you. And they needed a point guard, and they went out and got one. It's going to be fascinating to watch how they come together.
Is he there to take some of the pressure off of Ant? Because Ant seems to want to have the ball down the stretch. I don't think he's as good a ball handler as some of those point guards out there. Can that be a help for him?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I think at the end of games, it's always going to be in his hands because he's Anthony Edwards and the best player. I don't really care what team it is. The best player is going to have the ball at the end of the games if they can create their own look. But where LaMelo Ball will help is hopefully by the time you get there, Anthony Edwards hasn't had to do that 50 other times throughout the course of the game. So LaMelo Ball is really going to do a lot for getting Anthony Edwards set up. If the Timberwolves can commit to playing more kind of up tempo and get out and run a little bit, I think he'll do really well there and get Edwards a lot of easy baskets in transition. I was talking with someone yesterday after the trade was reported, and they were like, man, Ant's going to live off LaMelo hit-ahead passes because he's so good at that. So definitely going to be somebody who can help with all that creation stuff and just make life easier for Anthony Edwards, for Rudy Gobert, for McDaniels, for Dosunmu. He's a very helpful player in that vein.
The other pending major trade is this Jaylen Brown thing. Like, why are the Celtics in such a hurry to get him out of there?
Well, I think what's happened is we've kind of gone down the road with offering Jaylen Brown multiple times for the Celtics side, and now it is, all right, we've got to do this. If we're ever going to make the trade, we got to make the trade now because Jaylen Brown, his comments, I think, I don't think he intended them to mean what a lot of people took out of him postseason. What he said this past season was his favorite year in the league. I think what he was trying to be was very complimentary to, hey, my teammates and I, we way overachieved, and we were still, a really good team when no one really expected it. And instead it got taken to mean, oh, he just wants to play by himself and, isn't happy there. And I think the Celtics do know he got a taste of being the guy, and he probably does like that to some extent. But when you offered him for Kevin Durant a few years ago in a trade, and it didn't get done, and now you very publicly offered him in a trade for Giannis, even if they can't come out and say it direct, we all know it happened. At some point, the guy's going to be like, hey, do you want me here or not? Because you can tell me all you want is you're trying to trade me for great players, but I'm a great player too. Why not just keep me? All of that said, the Celtics are not going to give him away. They're only going to make a trade if it makes sense. And a trade, people keep pitching these trades of, well, here's a ton of draft picks and young players. That's not really what Boston wants. They're trying to win right now. So it's a pretty tough needle for them to thread to get win-now players that are going to really help them in a trade where you move Jaylen Brown because rebuilding is not what they're looking to do.
Talking with Keith Smith here, host of the Front Office Show, and at Spot Track, you can give him a follow at Keith Smith NBA. All right, I'm going to switch it to DC because all of a sudden there's a ton of excitement with this Washington Wizards team. They get the deal done with Trey Young. They draft A.J. DeBonsa. Anthony Davis, the team is talking like they really want him to be a part of it. Let's start with Trey Young. What did you make of that contract?
I have no issue with the contract being a max contract in the first couple of years, or effectively a max contract. What I don't love is the latter couple of years on that, because as this Wizards team gets into a position where they're going to have to pay other guys, and clearly that's going to sort itself out here over the coming years. But Alex Sarr will need a new deal, then eventually George and Carrington, and we'll see what happens with Koulibaly and those guys. You're just going to get very, very expensive, and then that's when having $50+ million for Trey Young may start to look a little tough to balance the cap sheet. But he's a really good player. I think he's going to help them be really an improved team going into next year. The combination of him and Anthony Davis, who I believe they're going to keep. We haven't even seen him in uniform yet, so I don't think they're going to do anything as far as trying to trade him. I think they're looking forward to seeing what those two guys can do with all of that young talent going forward, and they'll see if they can build this thing up and get into a place where they can kind of do what the Pistons did, which was go from one of the worst teams in the league to a playoff team to winning a playoff series, and just kind of move through the steps that way. And I think Trey Young's going to help them in a big, big way with that, at least over the next 2-3 seasons.
I agree. And then I saw this, and I'm curious what you think. Isn't there a strong possibility of an expansion draft, like after the 2028 season?
Yeah, so Adam Silver said multiple times ahead of the NBA draft in various settings where he's interviewed, when asked about expansion, that if expansion comes, they're looking at starting that with the 2028-29 season is when those teams would come in. So we've got this season, next season we get through, and then after the 27-28 season, we would have an expansion draft, assuming everything goes the way it always has. With that, and there's no guarantee, but that's the assumption, and we'll see. Now, would a guy like Trey Young be interesting to an expansion team at $50+ million? We'll see. But the other thing the Wizards could always do, let's say it goes really sideways, and it's like, man, this is now killing our cap, and it's not working out, and we want to move on. They could pay an expansion team to just pick him. They could be like, hey, here's a couple draft picks, like take them off our hands because we got to rebalance our books. So I think they know they're going to have options with that down the line.
Wow. I think that's pretty interesting in this whole thing. And, at some point, they're paying him a lot of money, but those expiring contracts become assets too.
Yes.
I like the Trey pick. I also like that Washington is very clearly trying to win. Like they're trying to compete. I think adding DeBonta is a huge part of that. The biggest kind of question mark, I'd say, is Anthony Davis. What do you hear about Davis in Washington and how that will go?
Yeah, everything since the trade has been he would have preferred to be with a team that's closer to title contention at this stage in his career, but he's perfectly open to giving this a run with the Wizards in seeing. And I think once they landed the first number one pick in the draft and then drafted A.J. DeBonta, I think that became even more so of, all right, we've got talent galore here on this team, and now we've got Trey Young. So it's not just me leading a whole bunch of kids. I've got a running mate who's more on my level career-wise as far as experience goes and desire to win and all those things. And now you get all these young kids that are going to grow up, and they're going to grow up quick. I mean, I think a lot of people, I know y'all watched it, but I think a lot of people around the general NBA fandom just kind of quit on the Wizards last year because it's, all right, these guys aren't really trying to win, and Trey's not playing, AD's not playing, who cares? But I think the people who did that missed out on Alex Sarr, improved greatly as the season went along. Keyshawn George, much better player, than he was as a rookie. I think there's a lot of talent within that young group there. And DeBonta, for me, was a no-brainer number one. I thought he should have been the pick. I think he's going to be great in time. It's going to take him, like every other young player, a couple of years to get adjusted. But I could not be higher on the future for the Wizards right now.
Love that, man. I love to hear that. Do you think they have to do a deal with Davis? Because I've seen these reports that he wants an extension. Like, when would that even kind of be a topic?
Yeah, that's going to be probably at some point this summer. We'll get a lot more about, like, hey, we want to try to get something done with AD. What is it going to take? Where do we need to be? And I think that, much like the Trey Young situation, is you got to be careful there because you don't want to, for a player of his age with his injury history, you just got to be careful how much you lock into, how big of money, how long-term of money, and those kind of things. That'll come up in August because I believe it's around August 6th when he's actually eligible to extend. So if you don't hear anything about that in the next month, I wouldn't stress. That'll come up later. And then if that gets sideways, then that's where things could go a little rough for Anthony Davis because I think he's going to probably have a conversation of, hey, if you don't really want me here, like, what are we doing? Let me get somewhere else who does want me, is willing to pay me, because it's not like it's, well, passing up on a chance to win the title. Because they're not, as high as they am on the future, I don't think they're going to be in that position this upcoming season. So that's something to keep an eye on there. But the Wizards traded for him knowing that would be where things would go, and they've definitely, I would assume, have all kinds of backup plans ready to go, depending on how those negotiations play out.
If a opportunity came up to move him, what you think they can get for a guy like Anthony Davis with that injury history?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Are you willing to take on some money that's maybe a little sketchy the other way? It would depend on what they're prioritizing, like positional fit. But you could be able to get players who can play, but maybe their contracts aren't so great. You could certainly take on draft picks if they wanted to do that. Now, I think we've moved out of that phase of this rebuild. So I think it would be, hey, if we're moving Anthony Davis, we want guys who can actually come in, help us win, and help us play. And they're probably going to have to be more of like a power forward type player because just looking at this roster, this team has guards and wings for days. So it's going to be, all right, we need a little bit more size to go with Alex Sarr up front if we're going to move Anthony Davis. And you could certainly pull that off. My sense is we'll see if that's where it goes, but it's probably only going to be a conversation if they can't come to an extension and he starts to agitate of, hey, then get me somewhere else.
Yeah, so the timeline for that is August. I'm very curious how that will shake out.
Yeah.
But doesn't AD have 2 years on his deal? Like, is it
58
standard?
and 62, I think.
Yeah, is it standard to offer extensions with 2 years left?
Well, next year, he has this upcoming season and the season after that's a player option. So functionally, he could walk for nothing at the end of this season. He could opt out and walk away to another team. That's why when you get to this point in these contracts, you almost kind of ignore the player option year because you don't have control of that as the team. So what you're trying to do, if you want them long term, is we're going to extend. When it's multiple guaranteed years and there's no options attached, yeah, teams get a little bit more of, all right, hold on, unless you're like Nikola Jokic and you're very clearly our franchise guy and we're going to do what it takes to get you extended, then we'll do that. But if it's a situation where, all right, if we don't do an extension, we'll talk about it later. If you're Anthony Davis, you're going to say, well, then I'll opt out and I'll run to whoever has cap space that fits where I want to be and what I want to do as a player. So that's where you have to be careful with that.
It's interesting because I kind of thought if he was going to get moved, it would be at the draft. But we've now seen, I mean, the Ball trade came after the draft. You know what I mean? Like there was, I mean, obviously the Giannis thing was the headliner, but
Yes.
There wasn't that much action at the draft with trades and stuff, which I found kind of interesting. But I guess
we don't. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No,
We don't always see the superstar trades at the draft. It's more of the nice starter level guys that get moved around at the draft and those kind of things. So I'm not overly surprised. I mean, it's funny. So much has already happened, and with contracts being agreed to and trades being agreed to. Free agency doesn't even open until the 30th at 6 p.m. So we're still, 4 days away, from free agency even being officially open for negotiations. Now, trades, you can negotiate. Those are a little bit different. But, yeah, we're really in this position where it's like, holy cow, so much has already happened, but I'm not surprised that other things haven't happened yet.
Who is the biggest free agent now? Because it seems like free agency has changed so dramatically in the NBA that it's all sign-in trades because these guys can get more money with their current teams, right? Yeah.
Can I interest you in Norman Powell?
No.
That's kind of where we're at. Norman Powell's he's a really good player, and he was an all-star last year, but this is a guy who's in his 30s now, and you're not breaking the bank for him. And obviously, it's LeBron James, but that's a whole different kind of world where at this point in his career, LeBron's going to tell us where he's playing. He's not going to do meetings like you did once upon a time with everybody come pitch me. It's going to be, here's where I'm going. We're going to make it work, and here's how it happens. But you're absolutely right. What's happened in the NBA now is extensions have become so lucrative for players. What they do is they extend, and then when they're not happy, they ask for a trade and say, hey, all right, it didn't work out. Now let's move me along in trades. Trades, it's extensions, then trades are really how business gets done in the NBA. And here's what I always say. It's almost kind of more fun because when it's a free agent signing, it impacts one player going to one team and maybe impacts the team they left. When it's a trade, it's going to be multiple teams and often multiple players involved, so you get a lot more movement that way.
Keith, man, the great information. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, man. Bud. Keith Smith from Spot Track and the Front Office Show. Give him a follow at Keith Smith NBA.